but there's been some challenges that you all have been faced with as minority developers navigating this space with success. So I wanted to invite these ladies to speak and have a conversation with us, because each one of them is a minority, whether it's the sex minority or the race minority, but they are all plugged into some amazing developments that are happening in the city. So I think that they're going to be able to share some experiences, some words that you all will be able to walk away with feeling more equipped and more empowered to successfully navigate down this road of development. So if each one of you could just give a quick, brief background to kind of what you're doing now in terms of development and how you ended up there. And I guess we'll start with Miss Valerie McMurray. You might have to turn your mic on.
Can you hear me? Awesome. Well, I'm Valerie McMurray, and I'm originally from Louisiana. I've been in Oklahoma City now for the past 30 years. I'm the Director for Community Outreach and Wellness at Metro Technology Center. But God planted it on my heart to step out in faith, and I'm the CEO and founder of GRD, which is Ground Root Development. So I became a developer. I think my story may be a little different from maybe some things that I've heard. My motivation factor started from watching generational poverty and wanting to see what do we need to do if you have generational poverty. The only way that you can combat that is generational wealth. And that is by owning something. Although I grew up in a very small, poverty-stricken town, my mother had an education, we owned land, and we owned crops, and we were able to survive. We were entrepreneurs. And that was very important. So when I moved here and started working in the community, I really got a distaste for seeing that we didn't own anything. And I know that, God said above all, He wants us to prosper, to be in good health, and our soul to prosper. And it wasn't looking like prosperity to me. So I made a decision that I was going to step in and do something about what God had given me was the ability to connect the dots, be resourceful. So I stepped out on faith and started my business. I'm still working. I kept my full-time job, so make sure sometime if you're not ready to step out, keep your full-time job. But I'm very blessed because did I have it in my DNA to be a developer? No. I had a different driving force. And so, but I surrounded myself. I have a team, Julie Coffey, Mr. Erwin Mason, Karen Waddell is also one of our advisors, and Shardina is our designer. So we came together and we decided that we all had a love for the Northeast. Two of us are not even from here, but we decided we wanted to change what it looked like. So my first project, I left my luxurious comfort level, and God said, if you want to change the neighborhood, move into the neighborhood. So I built a home and moved right into the neighborhood. And at this time, we're getting ready to build one more home, break ground in about a month, and then we have a SPUD project that's on the table right now. So hopefully by the middle of next year, we will be on our 7th project.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Ashley, what about you and your story?
Thanks so much. That's such an amazing story. It's really not fair to have to go after a powerhouse like Valerie with my personal story. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here this morning. What an amazing group of people. This is just phenomenal, and I'm super pumped about it. My name's Ashley Terry, and I serve as the Vice President of Development for Wheeler District. You may be familiar with Wheeler District if you know the Ferris wheel on the south bank of the Oklahoma River. Most people know the Ferris wheel. Not everyone knows that we're building a neighborhood around the Ferris wheel, but we've got 150 acres there that I work on the development team. We are completing phase 1, well into phase 2, and getting ready to start phase 3 of the project. So it's kind of just a baby development if you compare it to something like Page Woodson that is so far in its development process. We're just a few years in at this point. So I'll just share a quick little bit about my story. Is that what we're supposed to do right now? Okay. I'll share a quick little bit about my story. I have a really interesting background and a really fascinating path, I think, for how I made my way into development. I'll start by saying that after I went to high school, I went to college for a couple of years and decided at the time it really wasn't for me. So I started doing hair. I was a hairstylist for almost a decade. Made really good money doing that. Got really bored really quickly. If you're entrepreneurial at all, as Valerie mentioned, once you've built a business, sometimes it's fun to sustain it. For me, it wasn't. So I picked up a book that ended up being about urban design by a man named Yen Gell. Read that book, was really fascinated by what he had to say. A few weeks later, I had the opportunity to go to one of the very first conferences, the TED OU conferences happening at OU, and was fortunate enough to hear from a guy named Jason Roberts. If you're not familiar with Jason's work, I don't know if I should be holding this differently. Okay. If you're not familiar with Jason's work, he works with a group called Better Block. It's a tactical urbanism strategy where you essentially come in and you spend, for us, a couple of months putting a bunch of things together in order to show what investment in a community could look like. Can you all hear me without the microphone? Okay. No? Okay. I'll try and hold it close enough but far enough away. I know those squeals are annoying. But yeah, so I did Better Block. It was an amazing opportunity. I see some friends. Michelle Macbeth is here. I made so many wonderful connections. One of them was with the developer of the Wheeler District project. We stayed in touch after that, quickly found out through the Better Block process, the friends that I had made, and really just kind of being immersed in what developing a block could look like for a few months, that I had a passion for how built environments affected people. So I went back to school. I started working on a degree around the same time. I also was approached by the developer of the Wheeler District project to see if I would come join their team. So throughout the last few years, that was in 2015, right as things were getting kicked off, the Ferris wheel opened in 2016. We've been working on Wheeler District really since my first day. We had our first residents that moved in April of 2019. So it gives you a real quick progression of what has been a very long 7 years of this project. So that's kind of my background and the way that I made it into development. It's not at all ordinary. And in fact, it's a fun story for me to tell often, but I really liked sharing it with people because I would just generally say, like, it's never too late. As Valerie mentioned, no matter what your motivation is, like, you really can get started in development at any point in your life, whether you leave a career and go start developing, whether you stick with your career and start your development company on the side. Really, no matter what you're doing, we're really fortunate to live in a place like Oklahoma where developing small projects are attainable, and it's really a great way to get started. So I just say, like, you've taken the first step. For me, the first step was a Better Block project with some friends. You've taken the first step and you're well on your way. So
thank you for sharing. And then last but not least, Miss Gina, how did you get into development?
So I'm going to start by just saying I've been in this business for about 37 years, in the business of the built environment. But I'm going to start when I was a little girl. When I was a little girl, I'm not from Oklahoma originally. I'm from Nigeria originally. But I came here when I was a little girl. And I lived right over here in this area. I first lived with an aunt of mine, a couple of aunts. One lived on Euclid, one lived on Jordan, and then I ended up living in the Wall Court in the apartment on the second floor on the southwest end of the second floor. And we moved. I went to church here. This campus right here, or just a block over, was Lincoln Elementary School. and Ebenezer Baptist Church. And I went to church at Ebenezer Baptist Church. I went to school at Lincoln Elementary School. And then urban renewal came through, and my church was purchased. We had just finished paying off the mortgage, and we had to move as a church. Eventually, we ultimately had to move as a church. But before that, my mother ended up we moved to Garden Oaks, and that was our first home. And when I was a little girl, I used to play, these were my toys. I had Barbie dolls, Barbie doll clothes. I had baby dolls. And I played with my brother's Hot Wheels and the Hot Wheel tracks. And I would go outside and build buildings, create lakes, put roads in, and build basically cities when I was a little girl. So I have literally lived out my life as a child, what I did as a child. I went to Oklahoma State University, and I graduated. I started out in architectural engineering, and then I ended up changing to industrial engineering and management. I graduated from there, and I moved to the New York tri-state area, and I lived in the New York area for about 23, 24 years. And I worked as a project engineer, project manager, and I worked for corporations, Fortune 500 and Fortune 50 corporations, and that's really where I got my experience as a project engineer and a project manager. I always sort of thought, what is this thing about development? But it was never something that I particularly said, I'm going to purpose to go out and do that. I left my corporate job to start my own company, Gina Sofola and Associates, and it's a project management consulting firm. I came back to Oklahoma City because I was starting a family and I had gone through a divorce. However, I remember, since Valerie has opened that door, and I feel very blessed to be able to open this, to piggyback on this door. I was living in Connecticut, and I was on my knees praying, and I heard God say, go home. I want you to go home. And I said, no, thank you. I don't think I'm doing that. And he just started saying to me, there's building going on, and I need you to be a part of it. And that got my attention. And he began to move things and orchestrate things so that I had to come back home. And I was immediately thrust into this world of planning and immediately introduced to the city planners here, and what at that time in 2004, what they were doing and what they were trying to do with reestablishing or looking at 6 sites in the Northeast area. And I happened to be asked to facilitate some design charrettes, and that design charrette was the 4th Street Jewel Theater design charrette. And ultimately, Paige Woodson ended up being a part of that because the community was so passionate about Paige Woodson. And so I learned some things. I learned that even then, the city and the city planners did not completely understand our community because they thought that what was extremely important was 4th Street, was the Jewel Theater. They did not realize how passionate people were about Paige Woodson. And it was within those design charrettes and focus groups that the community really did sort of establish even then a vision for what they wanted that area to look like. And I remember then Commissioner Shirley Darrell, who's now passed, and she said something to me or she said something in those charrettes that has never left me, and it really turned, it sort of established a path and why I was able to stick with it and not give up. And that was that when urban renewal came through, she made this statement. She said, "You stole my children's inheritance." And when she said that, a light bulb went on for me, because all of a sudden I realized what the real issue was. It was not about the fact that my community was gone. It was not so much about the fact that, you know, you bought my property and you boarded it up and you left it. It wasn't about those issues. It was at the root of it. It was about you kept me from generating wealth for the next generation. And it was that statement that all of a sudden led me to say, okay, this is not only important, it is essential that we are able to not only preserve an African American asset, but repurpose it into something that's tangible for the future. And so I was able to work with community then. I worked with Marjorie Young, who was very passionate. She wasn't from Oklahoma originally either, but she was passionate about preserving the school. And we were just a great, we were a great team, because I had the project management, the engineering, and I was looking to expand my business as well. I wasn't looking to be a developer. I was looking to be a project manager, and my company was expanding. And so fast forward, though, it's been a real blessing to have come full circle to work with this developer who initially purchased the school really because he wanted to develop the 18 acres around it. Did not really completely understand all of the dynamics with the African American community. But he will now tell you that he has drank the Kool-Aid, and he is fully on board with doing what was not only financially sensible, but what was ethically right in rebuilding this neighborhood and recognizing and supporting the African American community around it. So one thing I wanted to say, you said about earlier about making Northeast Oklahoma City an awesome place to live. Northeast Oklahoma City is and has always been an awesome place to live. And when I came back to Oklahoma, people asked me, well, what do you want to do with your business, or, you know, in terms of additional work? And it's always been very difficult to say what I want to do, because I came back on assignment. And I came back, my real passion has always just been, what do we do for Northeast Oklahoma City to make it what it used to be and beyond?
That's really good. What would you say to the folks in the audience today in terms of, you know, I'm a minority, my background wasn't in development before I got into development. What are some resources or things that you've seen kind of integrated into your journey that's really brought you up to speed in terms of being a successful developer?
Well, again, I think I came with project management background. I came with engineering. So I've always worked with architects. I've always worked with engineers. I've always managed them, you know. So that part was, I did not have to, there wasn't a learning curve for that. But there absolutely still was a learning curve in development. How you acquire the land use issues, zoning issues. Those are things I really never had to deal with, because when I got a project, all of that had already been done. And because I worked with corporations and municipalities, I didn't work with private developers, so I didn't understand all of the challenges that as a private developer has to raise the money, not only hire the team, but come up with the working capital to make sure that the work is done, the timing issues, the capital stack, establishing that, and all of those, some of those terminologies were new to me. So all I can say for me, I ended up also going back to school at the University of Oklahoma, and I got in the RCPL program, Regional City Planning Program. I had probably been, like I said, doing planning work for several years. I didn't really know I was doing planning work. I went back to school because every city that I had worked in, I ended up working with a group of built environment professionals. When I was in Denver, I worked with transportation. When I was in New York, I worked with, all kinds. And when I was in Kansas City, I worked with municipalities. And here, I just seemed to always be in planning. I always seemed to be working with planning. So going back and going through that program actually helped me to navigate, or it reinforced some of the things that I was experiencing. It was almost like my planning experience was providing the educational role, and while my work experience was providing the case studies related to my educational role. So because I really didn't know what I didn't know. I thought you came to the program, or I came to the table with project management and engineering background, and I thought that's all I needed. I didn't know what I didn't know until going back to school and being in the room. Some things are taught and some things are just caught. You just know it because you get to do it, and because you're in the room, so you begin to understand it.
That's good. Ashley, what about you?
Yeah, I'll generally say, for me, one of the best lessons learned through really diving into things through the Better Block experience was that finding a room of like-minded people was going to be something that was hugely important for me. And so through that experience, I met a group of folks that were from ULI, Oklahoma. That's the Urban Land Institute, Oklahoma. And for me, it was like finding these kindred spirits of people that I really knew had a passion for what I had a passion for. And what was so fascinating about ULI was that it wasn't just architects, it wasn't just engineers, it wasn't just bankers. It really brings everyone to the table. So it's for a group of people that are interested in land use, that are interested in development, that are interested in making our city a better place. And so I was like, oh my gosh, these are my people. And what was great is ULI has people that are at all stages of development. And so there were lots of people like me who were literally just wetting their feet in the idea of how the built environment changes people. And then there were people who had developed huge, amazing projects in our city, who had been part of saving the Skirvin Hotel or working on Myriad Gardens or something like that. Those people were also in the room. And it's a group of 300 folks, but it's incredibly attainable. Lots of networking events, lots of places where you can actually get face-to-face and meet people. And so I got to be in the room with these people who had done amazing projects on day one. And so for me, it was about finding that kindred group of people here in Oklahoma City doing what I thought I might want to do. And at the time, that was ULI Oklahoma. It still is. I'll just generally say I'm incredibly biased now as I serve as the district council chair for our Oklahoma chapter. But it really is one of the most amazing groups of people. And I'm just all about making Oklahoma City better, and so are they. And you really can't go wrong when you get all those people in the same room.
And Valerie, what about you?
I think for me, my driving force, as I said kind of earlier, you have to think about the why. Why do I want to do this? It has to be, for me, greater than self, because if it's just for self, you'll end up stopping and getting discouraged. But when you realize that what I'm doing is about the next generation, it is about redeeming, it is about restoring, it is about hope, that gives me the energy to push forward. For me, I've always had an opportunity to connect the dots. As I said before, I tell everyone, we build homes, but we build communities. So community is my heartbeat, and homes is the brick and mortar. And so I've always had an opportunity to be at the table, but I didn't have the experience. That I wasn't a Gina, I wasn't a Julie, but I had the vision. And I decided that, you know what, I don't have to have all the pieces and the dots connected. I have to do well at what I can do, and then I can collaborate and get those other pieces that I don't have. And so I think that's very important because we underestimate the skill sets that we have. We have to realize our skill sets are transferable. They don't stop in just one area. You can do things across the table. If you're a great dot connector, you can connect those dots in various fields. So you don't have to have it all together. You do have to sometimes, though, do your homework, step out in faith, and make sure, for me, what I wanted to do before I got started, I was able to fund my own first project because I didn't want that door to be closed. And so what I did, I stepped out. I sold my home in Deer Creek in Edmond. I moved into an apartment. I positioned myself to be able to be where I am now. I won't take that credit. God positioned me. And so I was able to really follow through with my faith and the tenacity to know that if those doors were closed, I wasn't necessarily dependent on someone else that had to pay those bills. So I think positioning and timing is very, very important. But I will suggest put yourself in those spaces. You can't do this by yourself, and especially if you're looking at trying to revitalize and to restore, because when you look at restoration, there's a lot of things there. And for me, I took a holistic approach. As I said, my love is for community. It never started in development. I will admit, growing up in the country, we built tree houses. We built all of our own tree houses. And I remember my mom used to tell us that always invest in the land, never sell your property. And so that property, growing up as a child, that land and that property sent me to college. You know, it was able to sell timber. We were able to be entrepreneurs, and I didn't realize that how rich having property and have land and what that land can do for you. So what I did is took my upbringing and what my mother had taught me and the experience I had in the community, and I kept going, although I got discouraged at times because I knew that with an education, some form of education, having owned something, because it is shown that 18% of children that's raised in a home that's owned, that success rate goes up 18%. That's almost 20%, just a child being able to be raised in a home that's owned by a parent. And when we start looking at that, as I said before, that driving force in my mind continues to go back, generational wealth, generational poverty. It goes hand in hand. So how do we break that cycle? So once again, just embedding yourself in those areas, but you have to understand what is your driving force? What is your why? And once you identify what is your why, then you identify how. And what product are you really trying to, you want people to see? You have to be your brand. You have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And that's one of the reasons I did move into Northeast Oklahoma City, because I went in transforming and working with the neighbors, understanding people needed food. There are houses over there, people don't have furniture. The sidewalks are broken. The infrastructure is hard. So I wanted to be that beacon of hope and light. And so we have to realize if we want to do that, we have to be that example for others to be able to see.
And I would say that it's safe to assume that as minorities, you all have been challenged in so many different ways. And I don't want to spend too much time on that today, because I would say that in that same breath, as a minority, you have probably seen the opportunity to leverage some experiences or giftings or challenges that you've overcome through being a minority in this journey of development. So how could you speak to maybe how being a minority has actually benefited you in this new space of development that you've all have found yourself in?
Sure, I'll go first. I'll generally say, like, for me, man, it is a real bummer when you're the only woman in a room for a meeting. I mean, it is just like you walk in and you're like, oh, come on. I'll also say, like, people treat you differently. We have subcontractors that will not call me back, but will call our GC back, at the drop of a hat. If I walk up, they're like, oh, honey, can I help you into this house? I'm like, I have construction boots on too. We're here doing the exact same thing. So I'll generally say, like, as a female, you experience that not just in development, but just in about any field that you're in. For me, though, one thing that has been incredibly important, and unlike Gina, I didn't come into this with a background of, any project management or engineering. Like, I had such a significant J curve on day one of, learning what development is all about. I mean, it was, start to finish, I needed to learn everything. And so what became so apparent to me was finding partners that we could have at the table that would let me ask questions and would take time to help me understand things and not treat me like I was stupid for asking a question. We've worked with people that do that, and we've worked with people that don't do that. We've got architects and builders, and we've got huge projects. We also build houses in Wheeler. Like, we really kind of run the gamut of things. But for me, I would generally say, like, understanding what things I brought to the table, understanding what things I didn't bring to the table. Both of these ladies have explained that so well. And really finding people, I don't know how to install a steel beam in an office building. That is not a skill set that I bring to the table. But I know that I need to find someone who can help us do that. And I like partnering with people that can help me understand when I have a question about costs or maybe a process or something like that. They're willing to come to the table and help make that happen. You guys are about to hear from Franklin here in just a little bit. And Franklin built the Big Friendly Brewery out at Wheeler. It was an arduous project. It was something that changed multiple times throughout the process, and he just really kind of rode that roller coaster along with us. But he was so wonderful when I would have questions about, well, if we make this change, how does that affect this, and things like that. He would take time to work with me and fully understand, and really you need all that information to be able to be the decision maker in those things, and you don't have all of the knowledge on day one. So for me, it's not necessarily leveraging being a minority. It's more about leveraging what skill I know I do have and understanding what those holes are that I don't have, and really finding partners that are willing to not just come alongside and do the job, because there are hundreds of people you could choose that could do that, but people that are actually willing to come alongside and be a partner in what you're doing and make sure that the outcome is the best possible opportunity, not just for you, but for your tenant that you're going to have in the future, for your project, for them. I mean, it's kind of a collaboration amongst everybody.
Wow, that's really good. And then do you two ladies have anything that you want to add on to that, or just how you've been able to leverage your experience as a minority in this world of development?
And kind of for myself, I really don't focus on a lot of being a female, or a minority. I'll look at, and I think because of the way being growing up, I laugh because most people say, I've never heard of Duboc, Louisiana. And I'm like, I'm really not from Duboc, I'm from Unionville. It didn't even have a red light, okay? So I was raised during those times where I saw signs in areas that say no niggers allowed, or, so I grew up in a very oppressed area. So that actually helped me, push me forward for what I'm doing now. So being a minority, a double minority, it doesn't lend a lot of negativity for myself, because coming up against some of the things that I did, it prepared me for where I am now. And so I utilize the skill sets that I have. And what I do, I use wisdom, okay? Timing is everything. Some things are not to be told that you're doing yet. So sometimes it goes back to doing that preparation. I understand the space I am in. I understand the season that I'm in. I understand that. So it goes back to seeking that understanding. Where are you? And then what you do is use that wisdom, and I realized that there was going to be doors closed in my face. It's where I got a very diverse team. So I knew when to send the team members in versus sending myself in. And I think that's what we have to do, is start learning to operate out of discernment and wisdom.
That's really good. Well, I think we'd like to open it up to the floor. If anybody has some questions for these three fantastic ladies before we wrap up this session. So do we have any questions from the audience? Okay. Well, ladies, thank you so much for taking time today and having this conversation. Before we roll into our last and final session, I'm going to encourage everybody to maybe grab a plate and start grabbing some lunch, because this next session will be about 45 minutes, so I don't want you to be hungry. DeAndre, do you want to add?
Before we get up and go to lunch, Ashley brought up something super important, which is ULI, the Urban Land Institute. We wouldn't be able to put on PlaceKeepers or this conference without the support and connections that ULI has afforded to us. So I wanted to ask Ashley if she could speak a little bit about ULI, the opportunities available, and kind of things coming up.
Sure. Thanks so much, DeAndre. I really appreciate that. Well, I'll start by saying that our executive director, Michelle Macbeth, is in the room and has been here, I think, most of the day with you guys. So she is going to be a much better resource for what we have going on than what I am right now. But I'll generally say that, like, ULI is absolutely 100% the reason that I am where I am today. I can directly make that connection from the decisions that I made to how that organization helped plug me into where I'm at. It is, again, a group of people that are just so excited about making Oklahoma City a great place. There's builders, there's bankers, lots of people that you're hearing from today. Gina sits on our advisory board. Franklin's a ULI member. Reeve is a ULI member. Vanessa's a ULI member. Like, Ethan's a ULI member. Like, I'm looking out here, Travis, like, I'm seeing people that are already ULI members that are plugged into the community and helping us do what we do. We've got a book club going on right now about missing middle housing. So it's about the need to develop projects like duplexes, fourplexes. Sometimes those are in, you have to be really smart about where you put them, but they're absolutely necessary to making sure that we have attainable housing in our city. So that's one place where you could easily plug in. We also, we hosted a food desert symposium last year. We have the Impact Awards every year that honors impactful developments that are happening in Oklahoma City. So we really kind of span the conversation from small, intimate get-togethers where we're deep diving into topics that really have to do with land use and the built environment, all the way up to having a giant award show, which we are just determined to have, COVID be damned, this year. But we have a giant award show that's just a really fun night with 500 people getting together and celebrating good, impactful development in Oklahoma City. So I'm happy to provide more information about ULI Oklahoma. Maybe we can put together like a flyer or something that you could share with everybody. Michelle's going to be a great resource as well. There is a membership fee. It is a member-led, sponsor-led organization. But I can tell you it is worth every single dollar that you will put into it. If you just want to network and meet people, it's good for that. If you want to actually learn more and really kind of deep dive into some of these topics, it's great for that as well. So.